Today, you are going to learn how loading and streaming works within Next.js. We are first going to go over a conceptual overview within the docs on how instant loading states work, how streaming with suspense works, what is streaming, an example of it, how it impacts SEO. And then once we go over that conceptual overview, we will then get into an actual demo Next.js app kind of showing you how this works by mocking some slow requests and showing you how that kind of loading state would actually look and how to kind of implement this streaming for when you have pages or components that take a long time to load and you want to show some interactivity before that, so on and so forth. So great video here today, so let's get to it. So first off, the special loading.js file helps you create meaningful loading UI with React Suspense. With this convention, you can show an instant loading state from the server while the content of a route segment loads. The new content is automatically swapped in once rendering is complete. So in Next.js, similar to how when you create a folder and you create a page.js file within that folder, that is how you create a publicly accessible route and actually show your UI for that route. So if I create a folder called dashboard and a page.js within that dashboard folder, and I render out some JSX within that, that's what's going to show when I access the route /dashboard for my app. Next.js automatically renders that page.js file as my page for that route. And similar to how if you just use that page convention, it automatically does that for you. Well, within your folders, if you have a loading.js file, that's going to be used as your loader, or what is shown for your UI as your loader, while a certain page or component is in its kind of a rendering state, while it's kind of loading up. So you can add these individual loading.js files within your different route segments, within your folders, or you can do them individually wrapping around components and implement streaming like we'll do here in a second. And then you can also have a kind of default loader that you use for your application within kind of your root app, which I'll also show you here later on, okay? But Next.js, to implement loading, you basically just need to use their convention of loading.js and adding that to different route segments and things like that. So with this, an instant loading state is fallback UI that is shown immediately upon navigation. You can pre-render loading indicators such as skeletons and spinners, or a small but meaningful part of future screens such as a cover photo, title, etc. This helps users understand the app is responding and provides a better user experience. So it shows right here what I just talked about. So here within their dashboard folder, all you need to do is add a loading.js file, and that is going to be what is shown to the user when your dashboard page is loading. So here they render out a loading skeleton within their loading.tsx file within their dashboard folder, and that's what's going to show as their loader when their page is actually getting rendered for their user interface there. In the same folder, loading.js will be nested inside the layout.js, which is automatically going to wrap your page.js file and any children below in a suspense boundary. So when you add your loading.js page, you are effectively wrapping your page with a suspense component and making the fallback be whatever you return from your loading page. That's effectively what's going on kind of under the hood here. And then a couple things that are good to know: navigation is immediate, even with server-centric routing. Navigation is interruptible, meaning that if you change routes while you're still loading your page, that's absolutely okay to do. And you don't need to wait for the content to fully load before you kind of change routes. And then shared layouts remain interactive while new route segments load. And they recommend using this layout.js file convention rather than just adding like your own suspense components and stuff like that. Now, on top of loading, we also have streaming with suspense. So in addition to using the loading.js file, you can also manually create suspense boundaries for your own UI components. The app router supports streaming with suspense for both Node and Edge runtimes. So you can actually wrap suspense around individual components within your overall pages, and this can allow you to incrementally render different components throughout your page, or stream your components to your page and load these different chunks to your page, so the user can still see like most of your page, but you just kind of take a little bit longer for those things that might take a little longer to load, or they have API requests or different things like that. Okay. So when they explain streaming here, they first discuss kind of what server-side rendering is first. So there are kind of 5 different steps to server-side rendering. First, all data for a given page is fetched on the server. Then the server renders the HTML for the page. Next, the HTML, CSS, JavaScript for the page are sent to the client. A non-interactive user interface is shown using the generated HTML and CSS, which is the 4th step. And then finally, React hydrates the user interface to make it interactive. So they show this little chart here, which is also really nice. So the first step of this process is fetching data on the server. And then you need to render the HTML on the server. Then you need to load all of your code up on the client. And then React needs to hydrate that. But all of this is going to take time. Okay. But to jump over to the React docs, hydration here is basically where React will attach your components logic to the initial generated HTML from the server, and this hydration process turns the initial HTML snapshot from the server into a fully interactive app. So this hydration process is basically React taking your HTML, but adding all of the kind of like JavaScript and everything needed to add your logic to make this a fully interactive app. That is like the hydration portion, and the last portion of rendering your user interface to your document. And then as it says here, these steps are sequential and blocking, meaning the server can only render the HTML for a page once all the data has been fetched, and on the client, React can only hydrate the UI for all components in the page once it has been downloaded. Server-side rendering with React and Next.js helps improve the perceived loading performance by showing a non-interactive page to the user as soon as possible. However, it can still be slow, as all data fetching on the server needs to be completed before the page can be shown to the user. However, this is where streaming comes in. So streaming allows you to break down the page's HTML into smaller chunks and progressively send those chunks from the server to the client. And as you can see in this diagram here, instead of just rendering out this entire page right here, this like dashboard page, it's just sending one component at a time and progressively rendering those components on your user interface. So you don't just need to show the loading indicator the entire time. You can show the first component while the second and third components are showing a loading indicator. Then you can show the second component while the third is still loading, and then the third will come in. So as it says here, this enables parts of the page to be displayed sooner without waiting for all the data to load before any UI can be rendered. Streaming works well with React's component model because in React, you kind of think in different components of your page. And with streaming, you're just kind of sending chunks of data to your browser. And each chunk could be a specific component in React. So instead of waiting for all of your components to load and then show your page, you can just show your components one at a time as they get loaded with streaming here. And this mentions streaming is particularly beneficial when you want to prevent long data requests from blocking the page from rendering, as it can reduce the time to first byte and some other like key performance metrics of your website. And then here it shows an example. So basically, if say your weather component, it has a lot of logic and has a lot of API requests and it takes a long time to render all of that weather data, then you can wrap it in a suspense. And you can also wrap your post feed in a suspense as well, or another component in a suspense. So within my page.js file or TSX file, you can wrap certain components with a suspense boundary here and show specific loading for those by adding a fallback. So setting this fallback prop to a certain loading component or whatever UI you want to show while your component's loading, then you can do that using this fallback. So just to be clear, wrapping this suspense component from React around a component means that you want to render whatever you pass in as your fallback component here while the component that's being wrapped is loading. Okay, so while this weather component is being loading, you want to show the fallback here, which I will show you how this works in just a second. And this says by using suspense, you get the benefits of streaming server rendering, so progressively rendering HTML from the server to the client, selective hydration, so React will prioritize what components to make interactive first based on user interaction. So it has these cool optimizations here as well. And then also for SEO, Next.js will wait for data fetching inside generate metadata to complete before streaming UI to the client. This guarantees the first part of the streamed response includes head tags. So since streaming is server rendered, it does not impact SEO. So that is a rough overview of how loading and streaming works within React. But now let's head over to VS Code here and let's create a new Next app here. And I'm just going to call this, and I'm going to install, and I'm going to call this loading. And I'm not going to use TypeScript, ESLint, Tailwind, SRC directory. I am going to use the app router, and I do not want to customize my default imports here. And then now that this project is created, I'm just going to go to File, Open, and find the folder and open that within VS Code here. So I've now opened my project here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple different route segments or a couple different routes and pages and show a loading indicator for each of those pages, as well as for my home page, my default app page. So I'm going to show you how to create specific loaders for those different pages. So here within my app folder, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm just going to call this dashboard. And within my dashboard folder, I'm going to create a page.jsx file, and I'm going to export a default function called dashboard page. And all I'm going to do here is I'm going to return an H1 that says dashboard page. Okay. And then what I'm also going to do is I'm going to add another new file, and I'm going to add within my dashboard folder a loading.jsx file. And I'm going to export default function dashboard loader. I'm going to return an H1 that just says loading. I don't know why I keep wanting to say dashboard page, dashboard page, ... So what I've done here is I'm basically telling Next.js when I'm loading this dashboard page here, then I want you to render this dashboard loader. And then within my overall app folder, I don't have a root loading.js file. So let's go ahead and add that. So when my home page is loading, this is what I want to show. So I'm going to do loading.jsx, export default function. I'm going to just say home loader. I'm going to return H1 loading home page. Okay. So I have this here, but now I actually want to simulate slow, like API request to slow down this loading here so I can actually see my loading indicators. So what we can do here is we can use my buddy ChatGPT, and I asked it to create a stimulate slow API request function, and we're just going to use this function right here. So I'm going to actually create within my app folder, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it lib, because this is just going to be like a helper functions folder, although I'm just going to use one helper function, so this doesn't really matter that much. But I'm going to add stimulate slow request.js. I'm going to paste this function in here, and I'm going to just export this function. So all this is doing is it's taking two arguments, data and delay, and it's going to return a new promise in which it sets a timeout and it resolves that promise with whatever data you pass in after the delay that you pass in. So this is going to slow down the resolution of a promise, mimicking like making a request over the network, and that resolves a promise there later on. It's going to be similar to that without actually doing that. And this will give us more control over the duration of the requests to stimulate faster or slower API requests and stuff like that. So now that I have this function and I'm exporting it, I can go to my dashboard, and within my page.jsx, I'm going to just say const data equals, and what was it called? Simulate slow API request. And then I need to pass data. So I'm just going to say, I actually don't really need to pass it any data. I'm just going to do dashboard And then let's do a delay of 3 seconds here. And I actually don't think I need to render out this data within this page, because I think that since this is still dependent on this call here, or this component is, that this is still going to slow this down. But let me actually run this and double check and make sure. So if I do npm run dev, I've started my app on localhost 3000. So let's go here. Let's reload localhost 3000. And it does indeed load up with my default Next.js page. So if I go to dashboard here, it loads right away. So I do think I need to use that data somewhere in this component here. So I'll just do data and render that out here. So now if I come back and I click refresh, I do see loading dashboard page for 3 seconds. And then I see dashboard page, dashboard, because I rendered my data within my H1 and I passed in dashboard as my data here. So that works. So yeah, you do need to make it dependent on the data. I wasn't sure if I could just make the request and it would be just fine there. But with that, let's also add this function call here to my main page.js. So on my home page, and I need to import this stimulate slow API request. So import from my lib, and I need to actually import that there from so on and so forth. And then let's render out this data. Let's just do it within this page. And I'm going to just do home here. And we're also going to make our home page a little bit slower. And while that's loading, we should see loading home page. So if I go back and I load my dashboard page, I see loading dashboard page. And if I go to my home route here, and I see that I do get an error here, it's because I did a default import, but I need to actually wrap that in curly braces. So I think this should now work. So yeah, you see loading homepage, and then you see my homepage here, and you see that that loader right here is different than what you see when I go to my dashboard here, loading dashboard page, because within my dashboard folder, I have added a loading.jsx file, and that is going to use that as my dashboard page loader. Within my homepage, it's going to use my kind of root loading homepage loader right here. Okay. And then you could do this for other files as well. So if I just copy this dashboard folder, I paste it in my app directory, and I just rename this and call it blog. And then let's go through and loading blog page. And if I name this blog loader, and then let's call this blog page, and we'll rename this to blog, and we'll name this blog page. We should now be able to go to /blog here and see a custom loader for my blog page. And I see loading blog page because I have a unique loader here within my blog route. So to add a loader, you just need to add a loading.jsx file into that specific route, and it's going to use that by default while your content is loading. But now let me show you streaming. So to do this, let's create a components folder, and I'm just going to call it dashboard component, dashboard component, JSX export default function dashboard component. And it's going to take 2 props. It's going to take a delay as well as a number, because I'm going to just say component 1, component 2, so on and so forth. And then I'm going to say const data is equal to, and I'm going to call my simulate slow API request again, but I'm going to pass in my number as my data, and then my delay, it's going to be my delay prop. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to return a div, and we're just going to return, let's return a paragraph with just some lorem text. So if I use my emmet abbreviations and I type a lorem, it already populates some lorem ipsum text here. And then I'm going to do an h3, and that's going to contain my data, which should just be the number that I pass here. And then let's add just a little bit of style here to make these stand out a little bit more. So let's do border 1 pixel solid white, margin of 20 pixels, and a padding of 20 pixels as well. Okay, and then I'm going to render out a few dashboard components within my dashboard page here. So instead of just rendering this out, I'm going to actually go ahead and render just a div, and we're going to move dashboard page up here a little bit. And like so. And then I'm going to render out my dashboard components here. So I'm going to dashboard component, and let's do a delay of 2 seconds. And these are in milliseconds. So 2000 milliseconds is 2 seconds. And then a number is equal to 1. And then let's copy this. Let's just do 3 times here. So I'm going to Shift Option down arrow to copy that down 3 times. And I'm going to do 4 seconds and 6 seconds and change it to number 3 and number 2 here. And I'm going to remove my initial slow response here in my dashboard page. So the only thing slowing down the rendering here are my dashboard components here. So now if I go back and I'll go back to my dashboard, what you're going to see here is that it's going to take 6 seconds to load this. So I see my loading page there for 6 seconds. And the reason that this is the case is because for me to render all of my UI here, I need to wait for my component 3 to finish loading. So to show any UI here, I need to wait for all of my components to finish rendering. So even though component 3 is significantly more slow than component 1, to even see component 1, I still have to wait for component 3 here to render out. So to fix this, I can wrap this component in a suspense boundary, and this will implement streaming to where I can stream component 1 to my UI, then I can stream component 2, then I can stream component 3. So I don't have to wait for all the components to load. And all you have to do this is wrap this in a suspense, import suspense from React, and then I'm going to add a fallback and set that equal to, all we're going to do is an H2 component here, and I'm going to say loading component 1, and then I need to close my suspense here, and then I need to wrap component 1 in this suspense, like so. And then I'm actually just going to copy this 3 times, and then I'm going to take my component 2 here, I'm going to cut this and paste it right here to be my second component. I'm going to change my fallback to component 2. I'm going to do the same thing with component 3 here, cut, paste right here, and call that component 3. So now what we should see is that even though this final component takes 6 seconds, after 2 seconds, we should see component 1 here, because I now wrapped it in a suspense. So I can stream component 1 after it's done loading after 2 seconds. And then after 4 seconds, I should see component 2. And after 6 seconds, I should see this final component. So if I go back to dashboard and I reload, I see loading component 1, then I see component 1. Loading component 2, then I see component 2. Loading component 3, then I see component 3. So by wrapping these components in my suspense boundaries here, you can see that I improve my UI here because the user is still able to see these components kind of progressively get rendered as they come in and as they get loaded. And I don't need to wait for my entire page to load before I show my UI here. I can show these kind of incrementally, and I can serve these components and stream these components in a way that improves my user experience here. So just to overview here, to render a unique loader for a certain route, you can render a loading.js or JSX or TSX file within your route folder, or you can also do a default loader within your overall app folder. That's going to be your root loader. That's going to be used as a default if you don't specify a unique loading.js file within your specific route folders. And then if you have components that take a long time to load, you can do what we did within this dashboard page here, and you can wrap those within their own individual suspense component. And that is going to effectively allow you to stream certain chunks of your UI to the user when they are loaded, rather than waiting for the entire page to load. So thanks for tuning into this. Up next, we're going to cover error handling, parallel routes, and more stuff regarding this Next.js router. So thanks for tuning into this, and I'll see you in that next one.